Shalom. When the start of source by giving no praise to Yahweh, Ba'Shem, Yahushua, Ba'Shem, Ka'akadash. Double honors to the Apostle Great Millstone, and honors to you brothers doing the work of the Most High in truth and in sincerity. Yahweh's real name, for whom the world ignorantly calls God, Jehovah, Yahweh. His real name is Yahweh. The Son's true name is Yahushua, and when we pray Yahweh, Ba'Shem, Yahushua, booming in, humming the and Sham, meaning names Yahweh and the name of Yahushua. This one's just going to be a lot of reading in this one. Lord's will, when some precepts come, I'll bring them out. But it was just on this concept of, manufacturing consent, right? Because what you're seeing, as has been said, right, what you're seeing over there in, California is an example of that, right? These elites are basically, getting the people on side, right, for what it is that they're about to do. Because ultimately we understand, right, that the end goal is to come at us, right? He will do this, that, and the other, but the end goal is, those to come up against those that basically, fear and teach the Lord, right? So this is 2nd Ezra 16 and 70, right? It says, "For they shall be in every place and in the next cities, and a great insurrection upon those that fear the Lord. They shall be like madmen, sparing none, but still spoiling and destroying those that fear the Lord, right? For they shall waste and take away their goods and cast them out of their houses. Right, then shall they be known who are my chosen, and they shall be tried as gold, slag in the fire." Right. So once again, what you're seeing at this present time with what's going on over there in California, right, is this idea of setting precedent, setting the National Guard out, to come and quell protests. You're having the governor basically saying, coming up against the the declaration, then a curfew's being put in place, right? And yeah, it's at this point in time, right? It's being framed as oh, it's just against the illegals, right? Whereas people don't understand that these policies will come and affect you, right? That is always been the plan, right? So it'll come and affect these people, but it's all once again coming up, basically being prepared, for the time, of Jacob's trouble, right? To come up against the men of the Lord. So like I said, it's a read, right? You can see the size of the scroll bar, but yeah, so I'm just gonna prefix these with deep research. So this is on Gemini.google.com, right? What you call, I clicked the deep research button when it was actually kind of by accident, to be fair, and I just typed in the question, what is meant by manufacturing consent, right? That's the main thing I want to know. But then, how has it been used in the past? How has it been abused? What techniques are used? How can one look out for it, right? So I mean, this took like legit 5 minutes to to generate, 5 to 10 minutes to generate. But as you see, it goes through and like it does a lot of reading for you, right? And it compiles. Once again, this is another situation. However, right, because the irony is, right, in this article, it goes into how these different media outlets and etc. Can be used for manufacturing consent, right? But through the Spirit, one of the things I certainly say about this AI, especially if you're not a subject matter expert in something, right, is it will basically it can be used, right, in to rewrite history, to rewrite understanding, right? And there was an example of that, when the Apostle Cabal was going into the word, Easter, right? But yeah, so it's one of them ones where, like I said, it goes through quite a lot of different articles, different sources, as you see here, which is once again why it's called deep research, right? And as I said, it's going to be a long read, so like I said, Lord's will, get some presets as we go, right? But this is on manufacturing consent. It says the concept of manufacturing consent delves into the intricate processes by which public opinion is shaped and molded, often by powerful societal institutions, primarily the mass media, right? Which is an important part of, Esau's witchcraft machine, right? To basically sway the minds of the people to believe a certain thing, and to hate a certain thing. The CV was an example of that. And when we're reading through this, right, you'll see examples of that, right? So it says primarily the mass media explores how populations can come to accept and support agendas, policies, and ideologies, and is a key thing, even when these may not align with their own best interests or objective realities, right? This report will define manufacturing consent, trace its intellectual origins, deconstruct the primary theoretical model explaining its mechanism, examine its historical and contemporary applications, and provide strategies for individuals to recognize. Right, understanding manufacturing consent foundations and definition is at its core. Right, manufacturing consent describes a systematic management and shaping of public perception. It is a process through which the mass media, often influenced by or aligned with dominant political and economic interest, filters and presents information in such a way as to foster agreement or acquiescence. It's a nice word, that one. The reluctant acceptance of something without protest, right? Because among the broader population, this engineered consensus, right? Because this is very much engineered, right? Which is why, for instance, you look at the George Floyd protests and stuff like that. You know, like, and Jay kind of wait, what? You're protesting for this guy? When these times there were actually a lot better. If you did want to protest, there were a lot better cases, right, where basically he had completely violated, right. But by using that particular character, he was basically manufacturing consent, to these Edomites that already hate Jake, right. That's something in the scriptures, right. Let's grab that real quick, right. So it says Ezekiel 35. I'm going to get the one from here, right? Ezekiel 35 and 5 says, because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, right? Which is ultimate when you're looking at all of the things that he's doing here, right? It's, all the different games he's playing, he's executing his hatred, right? He's showing you his hatred. He's preparing a plan, right? So that he can be justified. It's like it in taking you down, right? It says, and has shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword, in the time of their calamity, and the time that their iniquity had an end. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord power, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. If thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. So basically, it's going to be a judgment for everything that Esau has done unto Jacob. But the point that I wanted there was just that perpetual hatred, right? When you look into that word, it's going into of antiquity. Right, basically, it's always been there, right? You also read what Genesis, in the enmity between thy seed and her seed. Continue on, says this engineered consist can be leveraged by those in power to legitimize their actions and policies, right? Which is what you're going to be seeing in these last days, and we've been seeing it, right? So the core concept shaping public perception, the term manufacturing consent encapsulates that idea that public opinion is not an entirely organic or spontaneous phenomenon, but can be actively cultivated and directed. Right, basically the idea that your opinions, ain't your own, if you will. Right, and this is also you could say that this is also touching on Esau's God complex, right, making people think what he wants them to think, right, because the scripture says, let me see, I'm trying to remember which one I want, because there's quite a few. Quite a few that come on. I can't remember the one, but I know this is Proverbs 21 and 1, right? It says the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, right? As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will, right? So basically, the understanding that we have is there's no such thing as free will, right? We understand through the scriptures that the Most High is the one that is in control of, what a man does, right? What a man thinks, right? What a man says, or everything that a man does, the Most High is in control of it, right? However, with the witchcraft and the tooling that Esau has, right? He's trying to do the same thing, right? That's why, you think about advertising, right? He's putting things in your head such that you're like, oh, maybe I do need that. You don't need it. right? I remember the elders saying that's what the whole, film Inception is really about. It's about this idea of putting ideas into your head, right? Such as that you start doing and believing in things that, as we read, right, may actually be, how did it frame it, right? How did it frame it, Salakia? Yeah, even when these may not align with their own best interest on objectives, right? So it's basically part of the fact that Esau tries to play the Most High, right? It's Ezekiel 28:2. So, son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, thus saith the Lord power, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a power. I sit in the seat of the Most High, in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man and not God, though thy set thine heart is the heart of God, right? So this is, Esau's God complex, where he thinks he can control everyone, right? And if he, for those that take that, that MOTB, that brain, that brain chip and that, right? He will be able to tap into this even more, right? Just pump ideas and thoughts directly into your cranium, all right? So let's continue, right? So in this view, media institutions, often controlled by their owners and beholden to advertisers, play a pivotal role in selecting, framing, disseminating information favorable to the interests of these controlling entities is typically promoted and presented positively, while information that is unfavorable or challenging to these interests may be suppressed. Right? It says marginalized or discredited. The outcome is often an alignment of opinion across a significant portion of the population, creating a perceived consensus that political actors can then cite as justification for new laws, foreign interventions, or other policy decisions. Right? So don't be surprised if a whole host of new laws, right, get passed. Right? Get passed for what's happening right now, in California, right? So we continue on. So just trying to look at something real quick on my other screen. Right, slightly bear with me. So, let's continue. It says this definition is foundational because it immediately highlights the power dynamics at play. Right, the media, far from being a neutral conduit of information, and one of the things he will do, right, is he will say, "Oh, that other country has propaganda," right? But these times, it's like, yo, when you listen to, Western media, you can identify the propaganda, right, very easily at that. Okay. It says can function as an instrument for shaping thought and behavior on a mass scale, right? So once again, I mean that's the whole thing. Manufacturing, because you're getting a whole host of people, a large group of people, to believe in something that once again may not actually be in there, and is let me reframe it, isn't in their best interest, right? The process implies a subtle, often non-coercive guidance of public understanding that can lead to widespread support for policies that individuals might otherwise question or oppose if they were presented with a fuller spectrum of information and perspectives. Because they use that word there, subtle, right? Let me grab this, right? In Genesis, the 3rd chapter, right, it says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, right, which the Lord Yahweh had made, right, and said unto the woman, yea, hath the Most High said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden, right? So the point that I wanted was this word here, subtle, right? It says H6175 IRA 1, right? Subtle, shrewd, crafty, sly, sensible, right? So crafty. Right, so what we're reading here is basically his craft, right? It says the duality in the term's conceptualization is noteworthy, right? So I'm gonna try. The thing is, there'll be stuff in there, but once again, you see the size of the scroll bar, and we're not even touched that far. So I'm just gonna skip certain bits, but there are good things in here, right? Furthermore, the process of manufacturing consent is not necessarily driven when it goes to say that, which is wrong. But yeah, so I think I'm gonna skip this bit here. Yeah. So let's go to point two, right? The propaganda model deconstructing media influence, right? So certain central to Herman and Chomsky's thesis in manufacturing consent is their propaganda model, a framework designed to explain how news content is systematically shaped. All right. So once again, this idea, I remember speaking to someone, and there was like, oh, the BBC isn't propaganda, right? This is a middle class, upper middle class at that, so-called white boy. When he was, and then when he said that, I looked at him. I was like, bro, you're not being serious, right? Right. And that's the difference between, what do you call it, certain of the East and West nations, because you speak to someone who's Russian or you speak to someone who's Chinese, they would let you know for sure, but they'll be like, yo, of course our government has propaganda, right? They'll be like, of course it is propaganda. We know it. It's like, why don't you know your own country does propaganda, right? So they'll hear certain of the things that their leaders will say, and they're like, some typical propaganda BS, right? But goes on to say this model posits that the raw materials of news, in quotes, passes through five distinct, quote, filters, right, that determine what events are deemed newsworthy, how they are covered, their placement within media outlets, and the overall emphasis they received, right? And again, the example that we have right now is that whole, which is actually going to list it, right? Is that Gaza Palestine thing, right? So there's the five filters of news production, right? The propaganda model identifies five general classes of filters that influence the type of news presented in mass media, right? Ownership. The first filter concerns the concentrated ownership, right, of dominant mass media firm. Right, I'm just going to jump down, right? So, for example, it is noted that 90% of US media is owned by six mega corporations, creating an environment where news items that most endanger the corporate financial interests of media owners face the greatest bias and censorship, right? And I forget where, I believe, right? You can double check. I think it's the Council of Foreign Relations or something like that. Or what basically one of them groups, one of the things that they ensured to do was basically to exactly this, to get control over all media outlets. Okay, which is why this internet has been such a thorn in this man's side, right? But the Most High was the one that was very much pushing of the internet, right? Because this internet has been pivotal, right, to the to people hearing the truth, right? Whether it be these scriptures, which is the main thing, right, but also some of this alternative information as well. Right, so Psalms 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of the Most High, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. Right, there's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. And you know what, more and more, especially with this AI, where you can do stuff like live translate and everything, it very much is a thing where this truth is everywhere, right? It says their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set the tabernacle for the sun, right? So it's referring to the internet, right? And that's helped basically remove this thing where like only you get your information and media from just six companies, as you're seeing there, right? Let me just take a sip of this tea. It goes on to say advertising, right? The second filter is the media's reliance on advertising, right? So yeah, I mean, we've all seen what happens when people start relying on advertising, right? Three, sourcing. The third filter relates to the mass media's reliance on information provided by government, corporations, and other quote experts. Cough cough. You remember during that time it was always the experts, right? Or official sources, right? These powerful entities have the resources to facilitate the news gathering process by providing a steady stream of press releases, news conferences, photo ops, and reports from think tanks, media organizations driven by economic necessity for continuous and cheap. And this is one of the things, the way they're framing it is, and which once again I said is relatively ironic about this whole kind of article, right? They're really not going into the reasons for all of this, right? Which is is basically trying to take power over everything. Here it is, the Most High has given him a power over the earth. So you can grab that in Job. Right, it says Job 9:24. Right, it says the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the face of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? Right, so here it is. The Lord is actually given him power of the earth. Right, but being the devil that he is, right, he wants even more. Right, so he wants to once again wants to control how you think. Right, he wants to corral you right into into more and more of a pit. Right, so Habakkuk 2:5 says, yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Okay, so you see that he is as death, right? And he cannot be satisfied, right? He just keeps taking and taking, right? So yeah, let's continue on, right? So back here, right, in sourcing, yeah, so that was the point, yeah, because it was kept saying, oh, they're basically trying to blame money, right, as the reason why you get this bias in news, and it's like, no, it's because this man's a devil, and he's got a plan that he is, trying to execute, right? In fact, let's grab that real quick, right? This is Psalms 83, right? About that crafty counsel, right? It's Psalms 83 and 2, right? It says, for lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. And what you're seeing right now is crafty counsel, right? Because you can be sure that there is there is a result that they want from this situation, right? So it goes on to say, verse 4 says, they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance, right? For they have consulted together with one consent, for they are confederate against thee, right? The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites and Moab and Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, and the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Right, so back in the article, right, in the research rather. So business leaders, politicians, and government officials are often presented as credible and unbiased sources, right? It says reducing the need for costly independent fact checking. Right, goes on, says FLAC refers to negative responses such as complaints, lawsuits, petitions, etc. That are used to discipline media organizations or individual journalists who stray too far from consensus favored by elites or powerful interests. FLAC can be generated by governments, corporations, influential individuals, right, or organized lobby groups. The threat of FLAC or its actual deployment can serve to police and discipline media content, that group of people that no one can ever talk about, right? Discouraging reporting that is critical of established power and doctrine, right? This creates a chilling effect leading to self-censorship and to avoid controversy or punitive actions. Once again, that group of people that no one can ever talk about, right? It says ideology and fear, right? The fifth filter involves the exploitation of a prevailing ideology or a common enemy, right, to mobilize public support for state policies and to marginalize the dissent, right? And once again, they're gonna, right, what have we witnessed over time? You had the savage, right? Then the T, and then the communists, and so all of these different terms, right, that will basically he has used and utilized, right, so that people can look at and be like, watch out for them, right? I said, I'm kind of having to find the main bits that I want, because it's a very long article, right? But it says the filters do not operate in isolation but are interdependent and synergistic, creating a powerful self-reinforcing system of control. And this is what Esau has, right? Esau's got several different, swords, if you will, right? He's got the physical sword, right? He's got the, the biological sword, right? But then how he manipulates people's mind is very much also part of that, right? To control them and to coerce them, and even to the point where he's getting people to go against their own, their own interests. right? It says, for instance, right, concentrated corporate ownership. Filter 1, naturally prioritize advertising revenue. Filter 2, to secure this revenue, media outlets incentivized to produce advertiser-friendly content and rely on cost-effective official sources. Filter 3 says if journalists or outlets produce content deemed too critical or challenging to powerful interests, they risk flack. Right, the overarching ideology of the moment. Filter 5, right? So whatever. So right now, so you see a lot of stuff about immigrants. Right, you very hardly see stuff about tea, which even as I'm saying this right now, right, I'm like, before it will be a thing of like, if something was to happen, it will be was it a Muslimina, right? Whereas now it's kind of like wait, was it an immigrant? Right, so it's even just how they just changed that type of thing, right, guys. So continues, so just get a table there, right. Says there's a lot of good stuff in it, but I'm gonna skip this. Right. So point 3: manufacturing consent in practice, historical and contemporary manifestations. So then it goes and say, well, he gives a case study. So you've got the Vietnam War, right? It says the media coverage of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam was, for a significant period, almost universally supportive of official policy, right? Then also, the Iraq War, and then this one I will read, right? Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? It says more recent analyses suggest similar patterns in the coverage of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, particularly concerning events in Gaza. Critics argue that much Western media coverage has tended to whitewash or downplay actions by the Israeli state, uncritically repeating claims made by Israeli government and military officials, while framing the conflict in ways that obscure the context of occupation and alleged apartheid. Specific criticism include failing to attribute civilian casualties in Gaza, right, directly to Israeli actions, but omitting Israel from the headlines about death tolls, using passive voice when Israeli attacks are reported, casting doubt on Palestinian accounts of events, and employing language that subtly dehumanizes Palestinians, right. And right now, once again, it's it's over there, but we understand that all of this is going to be used, right, against us, because that's really who E is coming up against, right. I'll read this first paragraph, right. A case study, the dichotomy, right, of worthy and unworthy victims, right. As a key mechanism for manufacturing consent, particularly in foreign policy, is the media's differential treatment of victims of violence or oppression, right. It says so it says Herman and Chomsky argue that media outlets tend to provide extensive and pathetic and indignant coverage to victims of states designated as enemies of US or Western interests, quote, worthy victims. In stark contrast, victims of actions by the US government, its allies, or client states often receive minimal, downplayed, or context-stripped coverage, if any at all, quote, unworthy victims, right. So you got all of the different examples, throughout the time, and it lists one there, right. That lists the electoral processes, right. So I'm going to jump down to point 4. Says key techniques in the manufacture of consensus beyond the structural filters, right, of the propaganda model. Specific techniques are employed in media content to shape perception and guide interpretation, right. These techniques often work subtly, influencing audiences at both conscious and subconscious level. Once again, this man understands, the human psyche. He knows how to, say things in at this point and say other things at other points, right. Scripture says this in Psalms, the 64th chapter, right. It says, verse 6, right. It says they search out iniquities, right. They accomplish a diligent search, both the inward thought of every one of them and the heart is deep, right. The way that he understands the operation of man's of psychology, right, rather what the Most High have given him to understand. Let me frame it like that, right. He then utilizes that for his own agenda, right, to then push against what the scriptures, to what that's was one of the things, but basically to make people believe what he wants them to believe, right? So it goes and say framing, right? Constructing reality and directing interpretation. Framing refers to ways news stories and issues are organized and presented to an audience to evoke particular interpretation or a reaction. It is not just about what is said, but how it is said. Right, framing involves processes of selection, choosing what aspects of a story to highlight. So, for instance, he will do something that's called lying by omission, right, where he won't go into what do you call it? He won't go into into all of the information, right, and leaving out. In fact, it actually mentions just a bit further down, right. So I'll continue on. It says emphasis, given more importance to certain facts or interpretations, exclusion, omitting other relevant information or perspectives, right, and elaboration, developing certain themes or narratives, right. So let's just read the table, right? It says framing technique, episodic versus thematic, right? It's presenting an issue as a single event or individual case, episodic versus in a broader societal or historical context, right? Thematic. So once again, you see that, over there in Gaza, right? It says frame examples, right? Framing poverty through individual stories of hardship rather than analyzing systemic economic factors. Right, conflict frame, right, structuring stories around inherent conflict, often simplifying complex issues into two opposing sides, right. Says using a human interest frame, right, using individual stories, emotional appeals, and then you always see that it'll be just like, someone cries, like, why are you showing us this character, right? The sad music in the background and all of that stuff, right. It says emotional appeals or personal experiences to make an issue relatable or compelling, right? It says example, highlighting a single worthy victim to generate outrage against an enemy state and support for intervention, right? Economic frame, focusing on the costs, benefits, or financial implications of an issue. Responsibility is attributing the cause of a problem or a solution to particular individuals, groups, or societal factors, right? And the morality, presenting an issue in terms of ethics, religious, or moral principles, right? It says agenda setting, determine what we think about. It's point B. Point C, the power of sourcing selective information. Language and imagery, and then emotion and manipulation. That's something he is very much going to be using in these last days, right? Which is why the scriptures speak about, how we carry ourselves, which we know they're going to come anyway, right? But this is how's it phrased? Let me look at my other tab. Right, it says 1 Thessalonians 5:22 says abstain from all appearances of evil, right? And that's it. It's like we've got to be very careful how we are moving around and maneuvering in this world, right? Because he is setting up a dossier against us, right? This is also Matthew 10:16. So behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Right. This is why we carry ourselves in a certain way. Why basically we ensure that we're not doing anything that could negatively harm the truth, because that's why you get characters like Vocab, right, coming and doing all of his what's the word, all of his basically like trying to find information about stuff so that he can then be used to present a case, right? You see, and they look what they said. They said this, right? Think about the girls, think about the children, all of that nonsense. You can imagine him going on some emotional tirade, okay? And it goes on to say the evolution of manufacturing consent in the digital era, right? So it's the social media platforms have revolutionized how information is created, disseminated, and consumed. Unlike traditional media, where corporate entities largely control content production, social media allows virtually anyone to publish and share information. However, this apparent democratization is complicated by several factors. Platforms like Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok have been widely criticized for their role in the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda, often becoming breeding grounds for conspiracy theories and highly biased narratives. Right? What has been missed here is the fact that they say it's democratized information, but it seems like there are only one, two, three, four companies here, right? So ultimately, most human communication is channeled through five, four these what is one, two, three, four, and then you got the Chinese one. What's that one? I forget what it's called off the top of my head at the moment. Right, so five. So it's like they're not actually still in control, because you post something that Facebook doesn't like, it gets removed. You post something that YouTube doesn't like, it gets removed. Right, so it's like, has it really? Okay. Try to see if there's more. This is a long ass thing, right? Cultivating discernment, right? Recognizing and resisting manufactured consent in an information ecosystem increasingly saturated with attempts to shape perception and manufacture consent. The ability to critically evaluate media messages is paramount, and this is it. Most people haven't got this, this ability, right? And we also have to basically become, impervious, if we will, I like that word. We have to become impervious to, these attacks, right? Okay, because that's ultimately what they are. They are attacks, right? So it says analyzing the source, right? Understanding financial and profit motives, right? I mean, one of the things we understand is like this information is coming from the devil, right? Identify framing, right? Being able to recognize how information is presented, the angle of the story, right? The language used, the images selected, and what is emphasized or omitted, right? Is critical to understand how the media shape interpretation, right? And question everything. And that's it. That's one of the things, this truth requires of us, is to be, very, very, very critical, right? To look into things. Scripture says this, right? This is 2 Timothy 2:15. It says, study to show thyself approved unto the Most High, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Right, so especially when it comes to scriptures, we're to study, link things up, right? And we see things happening in the world, right? First things we think of is, how does it affect, or rather, how does it apply to prophecy? Okay, yeah, and that's a bit more. I mean, there's a lot more, but we were going for a while anyway. But I mean, you see, it just literally just kept on going. But because it is a interesting kind of topic, and as we're saying, so we're seeing that this basically play out right now in with this situation in California, right? We can tell that he's making a plan, right? And everything that we're reading in is just like straight out of Esau's playbook, right? You got the lies, right? We can grab that as well. Psalms 58:3 says, "The wicked are strained from the womb; they go astray as soon as they be born, speaking lies," right? So that's a big thing in Esau's world, is lies. Okay, but through the Spirit of the Most High, right? Those lies are being it's like it's spoken about being people are starting to see through those lies, right? And that's all through the Spirit and power of Yahweh Hashem Yahushua. The Most High is revealing this man, okay, and his techniques, right? For instance, when it referenced the Israel Palestine thing, right? One of the things that that you see on online is basically people comparing headlines, right? They'll be comparing headlines when something, let's say that one of them Palestinians does something versus when them Israelis do something, right? It will be like, a bomb has hit a school, right? And then people in the comments was like, whose bomb, BBC, whose bomb? Okay, but that just goes to show you that Esau's time is coming to an end, right? The fact that he's basically being revealed, right? People aren't falling for his witchcraft, as much. Now, don't get me wrong, they still are, right? They're still in the world, but they're able. The Lord is making it such that they're able to see certain things, right? So Habakkuk 2:16 says, "Thou art filled with shameful glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of Yahweh's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be upon thy glory," right? So he is being uncovered, man, right? And people are starting more and more to be like, "But wait, that you're the devil," okay? Which is beautiful to see. So as always, Lord, what I was edifying. Till next time we say, Shalom.